Welcome to the Adventure Pro Podcast. Interviews, stories and inspiration from amazing people that have made adventure their business. Keith, welcome to the Adventure Pro Podcast. It's great to meet you after all this time. I've seen you a lot on LinkedIn and in other places. Could you tell listeners something about yourself that maybe a lot of people don't know?
Yeah, so thanks for having me on. So things about me, I run the BucketLister company and Rockin' Rapid Adventures. Rockin' Rapid Adventures is based in North Devon, and then the BucketLister company is a travel company where we tick off people's travel bucket lists. Rockin' Rapid Adventures has been going for 17 years. And then the bucket list has been going for 7. So it's fairly new in that term. And obviously we had the C word in the middle of those 7 years. So that kind of is taking a little bit out of that one. But from my point of view, I left school at 18 and I've worked in the adventure industry, I suppose, ever since.
Right. But you don't go from being 18 to running, a travel company. So if we start at the beginning, so you're leaving school 18 years old, and what happened then?
I'm 43 now. So at 18, I went and did a degree in adventure management. It was like one of the first courses, really, I suppose, in that subject at Plymouth Uni. I remember my parents. I remember filling out that UCAS form that we had to do for university all those years ago, and they were all like computer degrees, and I sneaked in one on adventure management because that's the one that I really wanted to do. I couldn't see myself being sat behind a desk. So off I went, and that's the one that I chose to do in the end. So I went off and I'd always been interested in climbing. I was a climber beforehand, did a lot of mountain biking, did some kayaking at home. I lived in Plymouth on the edge of Dartmoor. So the outdoors was always on my doorstep. So that's kind of how I grew up, really. So sat in an office, which is basically what I do now pretty much. But that's kind of not what I wanted to do back then. So I went and did adventure management. And then when I finished that, I actually went and lectured in adventure management and stayed where I was at Bicton College in East Devon. They kept me on as a lecturer straight afterwards. So I did that for like 4.5 years afterwards, and then kind of did the same thing again, where do I really want to be sat inside a classroom teaching? For me, it was about being in the outdoors. Then I went and joined an expedition company that dealt with school expeditions, and was there for quite a while and was their operations manager in the end. And then one day it all went a bit wrong and they went bust, and I found myself unemployed very quickly, and at that point I kind of made the decision that I didn't really want to work for anybody else ever again. I kind of wanted to make my own destiny and do my own thing. So I set up Rockin' Rapid Adventures then. So that was 2007, so I'd have been 27 then, and then really sort of set it up as a tool for me to work under, teaching climbing, freelancing, doing all those sorts of things. But obviously, having been in the school expedition company, I kind of had quite a lot of contacts. I knew a lot of the schools that were now looking for somebody to, take over their school expeditions. So kind of it sort of rolled into that a little bit in terms of, we started off as a school expedition company again under the Rockin' Rapid banner. And then things just progressed from there. And I had an office and we had some staff, and then the climbing centre in North Devon went bust in 2009. And they had accommodation on site that we used to use for our training weekends and stuff. So I kind of got a couple of people together, and then we went and bought that and took that over in 2010 and started running things from there. So that's kind of the quick way of how the journey's gone, really. But and then the bucket list company came. I mean, because we were doing the school expeditions, a lot of people were coming into the climbing centre. They were seeing that we were off climbing Kilimanjaro or going to Everest Base Camp, and they were like, oh, I really want to do that. So we started to put a few trips together under the Rockin' Rapid banner for adult trips as well. But it just became a really sort of kind of confusing marketing message for people in terms of, one weekend we had a school group on a UK residential, then we were doing a hen and a stag weekend, and then we were taking someone to Kilimanjaro. And I was actually at a marketing conference listening to Deborah Searle, who rode the Atlantic. And she just kept mentioning the word bucket list. And I was like, oh, that's a really cool concept. Like, everyone's got a bucket list of what they want to do. And a lot of the stuff that we bucket list ticks. And then whilst I was sat there in the conference, I just went online and typed in the bucket list company into a domain registration, and no one had the domain name. So I thought, well, if we just buy that and we'll run all the trips through the bucket list company. And that's kind of where that started from, really. So I bought the domain name, and it probably took me about 2 years really to do anything with it, but it was kind of always on the back burner to do something. And then sort of we really started pushing it then just before COVID, but COVID kind of got in the way a little bit of that one as well. But it's picking back up again now, which is great to see.
Yeah, sure. It is a cracking name. Wow. Absolutely hit the jackpot by getting that domain name as well. So you say bucket list, and you've mentioned Kilimanjaro. So what sort of other trips? I've been on your website; it's fabulous, by the way. What other trips do you offer?
So predominantly, we started out as a trekking company in essence. So we started doing the Everest base camps, the Kilimanjaro, Machu Picchu, Mount Toubkal, Great Wall of China, Island Peak. And then obviously what we started seeing then was that people kept coming back and wanting to do more. So naturally we added more trips to the list. But then we were kind of like, are we a trekking company or are we an adventure travel company? And actually, we are really an adventure travel company. So now we've started to put more trips in there that are around adventure travel rather than just being purely trekking. So now we've got things like a 360-kilometer cycle ride through Tanzania from Kilimanjaro to Ngorongoro. We've got a whitewater rafting trip in Morocco. We do a Chile and Easter Island trip. We came up with a few years ago some best of trips where we were looking at popular destinations that people wanted to visit. So places like Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, those sorts of places. And then we kind of created an itinerary that was both adventurous and cultural at the same time, just for more people that didn't want to do that kind of multi-day trekking stuff that we were kind of renowned for in the first instance. We've just introduced things like gorilla trekking in Uganda and things like that. So we're kind of listening to the people who are coming on us, and they kind of, when people are on the trips, they kind of tell us what they want to do next. And then either they're going to go and book it with somebody else, or if we can put the trip on, they'll continue to book it with us. So that's kind of how we're modeling what we're doing at the minute, is listening to what people want to do. And we've kind of got, a real core group of customers that book trip with us. So if they've got an idea and we think we can sort of get a big enough group out to do it, then we'll start marketing a trip from it, really.
Oh, brilliant. So you say that you're trying to come up with new trips the whole time. Do you sort of feel like you're constantly chasing your tail a little bit with that, trying to come up with new destinations?
Yeah, I think so. I think obviously, again, if you look at, COVID kind of got in the way. I mean, we were really fortunate during COVID that like over 80% of our people moved their trip to the next year or when they could possibly do it. And I think that's the difference with, some of our trips, is they are bucket list trips and people really want to do it. So it wasn't a case of like their holiday got cancelled. It was, I can't go to Kilimanjaro now, or I can't go to Everest Base Camp now. As soon as I can go and do it, I still want to go and do it. So that was really good, which kind of meant that 2022 was a bit of a frantic year in getting everybody away that had moved a trip and already had a trip booked in 2022. So this year really has been the first year where we've really started to look at new destinations. And I mean, you've seen me a lot on LinkedIn. I do spend quite a bit of time on LinkedIn. And I think that's where a lot of the ideas come from, because I think once you suddenly start to get noticed in the industry, then everyone's on you wanting for you to run their trip for them. So we get so many inquiries from people saying, we're based here, we'd love, for you to have us on your website and you come and do trips with us. And so, it's not a problem to find new trips, but from a marketing perspective, it's quite a lot of work to get that trip built and get it ready to get out there and get it promoted in whatever. And I think, ultimately, if we do too many trips, we've only got a list of a certain size. Like we've just launched a load of new trips now, but we were one of the first companies to allow people to pay for their trips in monthly installments and push our trips out so far in advance. So at the minute, people can book trips up to the end of 2025 with us and then spread those costs monthly. So a lot of people who are on our list, if they're going to book a trip, they've already got a trip booked with us for 2024 and probably 2025. So it's like, I've got no holiday left now. These new trips look amazing. I really want to do the Maldives trip, or I really want to do the gorilla trekking trip. And, they're like, I'm going to have to wait for 2026 now for you to launch the 2026 dates for me to book the next one. So it's
That's
kind of,
very clever.
We're all
Very
playing
clever.
catch up with it. But
yeah.
So, and, our repeat rate is really good, which is great. And that's exactly what we want. We're trying to build a community of people who like to travel. And I think, the biggest shock for me was with the company that I never really expected was how many friendships are made through group travel. So from, I did a trip to Kilimanjaro with a group last September, because that's the other thing. A lot of our trips are accompanied by a UK guide as well. So there's someone from the Bucket List company will go on the trip with them. And, when they all got back, they all booked a trip to Mount Toopcow because we've been talking about Mount Toopcow, and they're like, oh, that sounds a really good trip. And out of like the 16, 17 people that were on the trip, like 12 of them have booked to go onto Mount Toopcow together. So because they just formed those friendships on that trip. So it's really nice to have that community element in terms of, what we're trying to achieve. And, I think when I looked at it, the beginning of the year, I think it was like 76% of people who come to us book as a solo traveler onto a group trip. So they're coming at that point not knowing anybody on their first trip. But actually, when you look at the stats for the second trip, that changes because they do know somebody, because they're going with it from somebody they met on their first trip, which is kind of really nice, I think, in terms of giving people that option to go, well, actually, I really like this company. I really like these people. I want to travel with them again. And then meeting up in the UK and going for training walks. And, we've got a Facebook group that's just for our customers. And you just see it on there all the time where they're like, oh, anyone want to come up to North Wales this weekend? We're going trekking for the weekend, doing some training for our trip. And then, 3 or 4 of them will get together and go and do it. So we don't really have to facilitate that. They're just facilitating it in the group themselves. But it's really nice in that respect.
That's amazing. It's great to hear. So how much marketing do you have to do then if you've got such a good return customer base?
I mean, obviously, you always want more, don't you? We want to get busier. And, my job predominantly is, we've got a very small marketing team. It's probably what I spend most of my time on, lead generation and looking at how we can get more people onto the list. And we're in a competitive market. There's a lot of other companies out there. I think once people find you and they have a really good experience, they tend to stick with the same company and rebook with them, and that's great. But obviously, we would always love to have a bigger email list. So we do spend a lot of time marketing and trying to put the trips out there. And for us to load more, for us to have more trips and to put more dates out, we do need more people that know about us and that are interested in the product that we're doing. So marketing is still a big thing. Going to the shows and, trying to meet people face to face and, try and be a real company, really, I suppose, that people can kind of engage with. That's what we're really trying to do is, we've got a very small team in the office. People know everybody. When they pick the phone up, it's the same people that answer the phone all the time. And we don't want to get to the point where we're too big, where we are just a faceless call center. That's not the point where we want to get to. Sure. But there's still plenty of capacity in what we're doing to still have that small, friendly company feel, if you like, I think.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You mentioned earlier on about how you always send out a UK-based leader. That's something that really interests me, because I know a lot of companies. When I first started in the adventure travel industry, I was in that first sort of wave of that. Lots of companies did pride themselves on the fact that, we're sending out a UK-based leader. And yet a few years later, I was at that time at which the standard of in-country agents got so good that actually we saw a change within the industry. I don't know if you saw that as well. And then suddenly overnight, it would seem adventure travel companies were turning around saying, we only use it in country, because then more of the money goes to the in country agents, etc., and you get a more authentic experience. And they were almost using that as a US, as a selling point. So
yeah, I mean, we have just changed the way we do things as well. So we've just, and we've done it because we want for people to compare our prices as apples against apples, not apples against pears. Because in terms of, people land on our website and see our price and then go onto a competitor's website and see a cheaper price. And obviously the cost is having that UK guide there. And so now we've got our BucketLister trips, which are, as you just said, without a UK guide. You go there, in-country team looks after you. BucketLister Plus trips, we organise everything for you. We all fly out together. We do everything together as a group. So they've then got the choice of seeing both on the website and deciding which one fits them. Now, we changed it mainly for the main reason we changed ours was so we could offer more dates. That was the main reason, because obviously we've got a number of full-time guides that do all the trips, but we don't want to have lots and lots of guides because sometimes trips don't fill numbers or whatever. So that's why we introduced it. Obviously, in terms of the in-country provider, even when we have a UK guide there, the in-country provider is still running the trip. Like when we're on Kilimanjaro, it's our Kilimanjaro team that are running the trip. It's not it's not the UK guide they're doing it. And when we launched it, it was really weird because we had lots of feedback from our clients saying, the reason I book with you is because I get the UK guide. That is what I want. Like, I want someone to hold my hand through the airport. I want that. And obviously we were like, well, that's fine, because we still offer that product. But the other thing was we were getting a lot of people who were saying, I want to book Kilimanjaro with you, but you've only got 3 dates a year and I can only go and do it in July and you haven't got a date in July. So that was the main reason for us to make that difference. I think in terms of, for some destinations, I don't think you do need a UK guide. All our in-country guides are brilliant, but obviously not all the time. They're not with you all the time. And I think, for a lot of people, like, I took a guy to Kilimanjaro a few years ago. He had never been on an aeroplane before. And his first trip out of the UK was to Kilimanjaro International Airport. And that's a bit of a shock when you need to go and try and get your visa and do everything. And, if you've never ever been in an airport before, that was quite a big jump for someone like that. And he said, well, the only reason I booked with you is because I knew there would be somebody there to take me through that process, and it was fine. Now he's traveling all the time and he loves it. And I think, for some people as well, like, when places like Marrakesh, for example, can be quite intimidating if you are a solo traveler. Like, you turn up, you get a taxi into the souk, and then your guide, it might meet you for a briefing at 6 o'clock in the evening and then tell you the plan for the next day. And then they'll leave you until the morning. And then you've got to go out and get a meal or something. Well, for some people, they're like, that's quite a big thing to then walk out into the souk of Marrakesh and try and find somewhere to have dinner. Yeah. Whereas, if there's a UK guide there and they can go, right, I'm going out for dinner at 8 o'clock. If anyone wants to join me, meet down in reception and we'll go out and I'll take you somewhere and, I'll get you back to the hotel again. And I think that's kind of sometimes where the benefit of having the UK leader is. Never mind when luggage gets lost or there's a medical problem or you've got to, phone the insurance company because you need to get someone airlifted, helicopter rescued off Everest Base Camp or stuff like that. Just having that person there. And I know that, our in-country guides, they do like it when they have a UK guide with them. I think it makes their job a whole lot easier as well in some respects. And I think a lot of the time, I train first aid as well, and I've done quite a lot of training with our in-country providers. But I think that does worry them a little bit as well sometimes. Like, they're not as well trained maybe as some of the UK guides are in terms of first aid and if there's a problem on the mountain and that sort of thing. So I think they do like the UK guide thing. Like I say, we're switching both ways now. But it's very interesting that, we thought we would see a switch away from people going for the cheaper option in having the bucket lister trip. But actually, people are still booking the Bucket Lister Plus trips and wanting that UK guide in doing it that way. So I think it could open up another market to us. It gives us more opportunity for departure dates, but still having it, I think, is what our customers do want in some respects.
So, Keith, you're a fellow podcast host. How long have you had your... Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
So I run the BucketLister Podcast, and it's actually been going for a whole year. Last week was my 52nd episode.
Congratulations.
So I managed to do one episode a week and managed to be committed to it and do it, which is quite difficult, especially being away as well. That kind of causes a few issues sometimes as well. But
I feel your pain there.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, the podcast is about kind of the destinations we go to, speaking to people who have been on the trips, speaking to our guides about the destinations. Just things like that, really, just in terms of, it's an adventure travel podcast. Some of them are destination based, some of them are kit and ideas based. And yeah, I really enjoy it. It's I think probably the first thing I've actually committed to and managed to continue to do. That's the thing. So it was like, we finished season 1, season 2 will start again this week, and we'll try and do another year's worth from there as well. But it's one thing I really enjoy. And the episodes are anything from 20 minutes to an hour kind of thing. But, I know we were having a quick conversation before we started recording this one about how the hardest thing is about getting people to talk to about it. That's the kind of difficult bit about it sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Finding guests and I mean, I really enjoy it. I really enjoy doing a podcast. And when I started this during COVID, I was sort of under no illusions. It's not suddenly going to turn me into some podcast star. But if you enjoy it, then I think you just crack on with it, and you meet some really interesting people. So
you do as well. And I think I think from from running a business perspective, we're told that that the most important thing is getting content out there. And I just think it's one of those things that actually is a bit of effort to get the content out there, which is one thing that a lot of people aren't going to be doing. So if you have got a niche, then actually, if you've got an audience there, then it's kind of worth the effort of doing it to kind of be in a space that's probably a little bit harder to get into than having a TikTok page or an Instagram page and pushing content out that way. But I think that's kind of why I'm more committed to it in that way, because not everybody is doing it the same as other social media platforms, really.
Yeah. And are you a big podcast fan yourself?
Yeah, I listen to loads of podcasts. I spend a lot of time in my car driving to and fro airports.
Yeah.
And, I used to be an audiobook listener, but I was one of those people whose brain just goes off on another tangent. And then you suddenly realize that you've missed the last 15 minutes and you're sort of forgotten what's happened in the book. So, yeah, I think with podcasts, nice short sort of, 40 minutes is kind of my sort of attention span to it. And I use it a lot from a learning perspective, from marketing and that sort of thing, to kind of, from that perspective, really is where I tend to spend my time with podcasts. But also I listen to quite a lot of adventure ones as well, and travel ones, just to kind of get new ideas for my podcast, really.
Yeah. And guests.
And guests, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's take a step back then, because a lot of people listen to this podcast, they're either thinking about making a career out of their passion for adventure, or they're already there and they're thinking about taking the next step. So you started off, you had your centre, you got made redundant, and that was a sort of catalyst for starting that first one. What were the biggest hurdles you sort of had when you first started out?
Well, obviously in the first instance was cash flow, because I was unemployed. And I kind of made that decision of, well, if I'm going to make something work, then now's the right time to do it, because I've really got to work at it, because I've got to earn some money out of this. So that was kind of the biggest one, really. And I think in terms, and probably I didn't realize how hard it was to run a business. And the running the business bit and the operational side is fine. The hardest part is getting customers. Like, that is the bit that you really need to upskill yourself on, which is why I've sort of spent so much time in marketing, because, if you're a climbing instructor or you're a paddling instructor, you can go and put on sessions and you can run them brilliantly. But if you've got no one coming to you actually wanting those in the first place, then that's the real hard bit. So it was kind of taking that step away, I suppose, of not being the one that always had the fun and went on the trips and went and ran the sessions. It was understanding that actually I've got to be putting the work in here and actually getting the customers. And more importantly, getting the customers, it's keeping the customers and trying to get repeat customers, because, that's what we found with the BucketLister company is, you create a product, you create processes and systems, and you create a really great experience for them, and then they're going to come back. And obviously the hardest thing is getting customers. If you haven't got to keep finding them from zero every week, and you've got people who want to come back to you, then that's the best way of doing it, really, if you can get to that point.
Yeah. So where did you find your first customers?
So for me, it was being in the industry, already working for, I'd started off working in centres, but obviously being made redundant, I already had a little black book of people who I could go in, tap up in the first instance. So we found a few schools that, wanted the overseas travel. We filled that gap, but then we soon realised that actually this was a very seasonal business, and all of our money is not going to become available to us until we've delivered that product, which could be 2 years away. So for me, then it was like, well, how do we turn cash flow quickly? And it was a case of, right, we need to be putting on stuff now that we're delivering like within the next 2 months, not 2 years away. So then we were just going out to the schools again and saying, do you run residentials? Do you have camps? Do you, and like the first product we created before we took over the activity centre and had our own accommodation was, we had a mobile teepee camp that we would just take around the country in a trailer in a van and say, and we could have up to 200 kids on the camp at any one time, and we would put on activities, and they just used to turn up, and we put 8 people in a teepee, and that was what we did. And we were moving this camp around the country just to get money, and we had a team of instructors that drove around, and we did campfires in the evening, and we took them climbing and kayaking and did all the activities. And at that point it was a case of, we were literally like running around buying secondhand canoes because we couldn't afford to buy canoes. It was like, right, we got a canoeing session and we need like another 5 canoes for like 2 weeks time. Like, that group have paid now, like, let's go out and try and see you selling a canoe in a secondhand trailer. And it was really crazy, but it properly got you thinking about, having no money to start with. It was a really good way of going, well, no, we can't afford a really nice van. We can't have the sign written van. We can't, we just weren't in that position at that point. And we just convinced ourselves that the best way of going about it was to just create a really good product that everyone liked, and the schools wanted to come back and do it again and again and again. So that was really good. And like I say, then we got the adventure centre. And again, obviously I couldn't afford to go and buy an adventure centre. The bank weren't going to lend me any money to go and buy an adventure centre, like, not for the money that they were looking at. So, I had to kind of go and find a man in a pub who had a bit of spare money and convince him that that was the right thing to do. And he did, and that was great.
You go to some good pubs.
I went to some good pubs. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and just, it was I had some good luck in terms of meeting the right people and setting me up in terms of doing that. Like, I haven't got didn't have the cash to do it. My family certainly didn't have the cash to do it. The bank weren't going to lend me that much money. I didn't even own my own house at that time, so they certainly weren't going to lend me money to buy an adventure centre. So I had to be quite creative about it. But obviously that then came with a load of new customers because they already had people that they were dealing with beforehand. And of course, it made us then. It was really interesting because back then we weren't just a man with a van with a load of kit in the back. Schools were then suddenly looking at us going, well, you've now got an actual facility. Like you must know what you're doing now. Like we didn't have any clue what we were doing. Still the same, but it was. But I think people just looked at you ever so slightly different because you had that physical center. You were obviously more. You weren't going to go anywhere. You weren't going to let them down because they could see something physical that you had. So that then just made a big difference as well. Then, and what that really did for us then was finally allowed us to have full-time staff because it had a dedicated indoor climbing center there as well. So all of a sudden you were open 362 days of the year. So all of a sudden then you weren't relying on freelance staff all the time or seasonal staff or getting people in for a 2-month period to help you with your summer camps in the summer. You could kind of suddenly start to go, right, I can give you a full-time contract now. You can work full-time, which, in this industry, to have a full-time job in an activity centre is quite rare in terms of most of them are Easter to October or whatever. And then you could suddenly start spending money on training staff and giving them some more staff training because they weren't leaving you in 4 months' time and things like that. So that made a big difference, really.
So I'm guessing your working day looks a little bit different now. And you say you spend quite a lot of time in the office, but you're also actually out leading these trips. So what does a normal working day look like now?
Well, to be honest, so I live on site at the Adventure Centre in North Devon, and I've even moved my office into the house now, just so I'm not there all the time. The BucketLister company is now based in Essex, so my office for there is in Essex, so they couldn't be too further apart from in the south. And so for me now, I'm either on a trip, and I probably spend about 120 days a year out of the country on trips, I suppose. If I'm at home, I try and spend a couple of days a week in Essex, at the office up there for a couple of days. And then if not, I'm down here for the other 3 days. Like this morning, we've got a big school group in this week. So I was out there. I did a session this morning quickly because we were one short. So I went and filled that little gap for a little bit and did some team building. But predominantly for me, it is looking at marketing for both businesses, really. That's kind of what I do for both businesses on that terms. Both businesses have got a manager that runs them on a daily basis. And I'm there just looking at the marketing and a bit of the finance and that sort of thing. So my job's quite varied in terms of I can pretty much do what I want now, which is quite nice. But I have recognized over the last sort of 2 years that although I love going away and running the trips, I have to pick the trips now that I run because some of them are quite long. If you go to Everest Base Camp, it's an 18-day trip.
Sure.
The time difference makes it a real problem, like trying to communicate with the office back, if they need you for anything. And the Wi-Fi is not great for you to kind of carry on with your daily work, if you like. I was in Peru the other day. I had 10 days over there on an Inca Trail trek to Machu Picchu, onto a Lares trek to Machu Picchu. And apart from the one day that I was out of signal, I had really good Wi-Fi. The time difference is a nice time difference to have there because you're 7 hours behind. So by the time you wake up, that any questions you've got are already in your inbox waiting to be answered. And then kind of by 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock in the morning, like the office is finished and gone home. So you can then kind of enjoy the rest of so you've got a couple of hours in the morning to get stuff done. And then then that nothing's really going to be bothering you until the following morning at that point. So you can kind of then go back on and leave the trip and not worry about it and whatever. So, and I always find as well, like whenever I go to South America, like I'm awake at like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning because the time difference really screws me over. So I just get up 4 o'clock in the morning, do some work until kind of like 7:30, and then go and have breakfast and then carry on with the day. And I've kind of, when I come back from that trip, then I tend to find that I haven't got a great deal of work to do because I've sort of kept on top of it while I've been away. Whereas whenever I come back from a Nepal trip, I always seem to be chasing my tail when I get back then and have a lot of work to do at that point.
Yeah. The time difference is everything, isn't it? It's especially when you're trying to run a business, that's UK based, and oh my goodness. Yeah, I know that all too well. I know you've probably been asked this 100 million times. Keith, what's on your bucket list?
So what's on my bucket list? I mean, that's the lovely thing about this job is if there is something on my bucket list, I create a trip and then take a load of people and go and do it. So it works really well. Like the Maldives was on my bucket list. So I had the opportunity to go out in April to the Maldives for 2 weeks to look at a new trip. And we've just designed a new trip to the Maldives now. So I got to tick that off. I wanted to go scuba diving out there. I still want to get to Antarctica. That's definitely on my bucket list. And we're looking at putting a trip together for an Antarctica trip as well. Oh, nice. I haven't done a great deal in North America. And like I would like to go and do the Grand Canyon, do some whitewater rafting over there at some point. And I've never been to New Zealand or Australia. Those have always sort of bypassed me, really. I think because it's just so long to get there and running a trip. And those sort of destinations are quite easy for people to go and do off their own back, and they're going to go there for 6 months, or they're going to go and do a 3-month trip. And that's not what we offer. So it's not been on my radar, but I would like to spend some time traveling around New Zealand and looking at that. And then my biggest bucket list tick, which always highlights it this time of year, is I want to get a motorhome and follow the Tour de France around every day.
Oh, are you following it currently?
Yeah. That's why this time of year it always comes back on my agenda of that. It goes back up to the top of the bucket list again, and just to take that 3 weeks and just travel around France and wherever it is at that point, and just pitch the motorhome up and watch the day stage and then move on to somewhere else the next day. I think that would just be a really cool bucket list tick, I think, for me. Yeah,
one hell of an atmosphere. Yeah, to see them all lined up. Oh my goodness me, what a buzz.
Yeah, and just be in the mountains and watch them come up when everyone's screaming and I just think and again, I think it'd be a really easy one to do because you're potentially, unless you're on a mountain stage, you might see an hour's worth of riding on a mountain stage, but on most stages you'll just see them whiz past. So you could spend the whole day doing your work, like pitch yourself up, watch them come past, pack up, and then drive on to your next spot for the next day. I think.
That's in mine as well.
Well, maybe we'll follow each other around then on 1 year.
Yeah, let's do it. Right, I want to be mindful. I'm very mindful of your time. At the end of each podcast, I always ask 3 final questions. So the first question is, what piece of advice would you give to yourself 10 years ago?
10 years ago, where was I then? Oh, blimey, maybe a little bit more than 10 years ago. I think it would probably be about learn how to become a marketer if you're wanting to get into business. I think it's the one thing that marketing and sales, I was advised by somebody that they're the last 2 things that you should hand over to your team, because they are the 2 most important things in your business. Getting and keeping customers are the 2 most important things or the most important thing to run a business, and they should be the last 2 things that you hand over. And I've always thought, we need a marketing department and they can look after that and somebody else can do sales. But actually, in terms of your business, there is no better salesperson for your business than you, because you are so passionate about what you do. And just don't hand that bit over to anyone. If you are seriously thinking about setting up on your own, or you are setting up on your own, or you already have done, then those are the 2 most important things, sales and marketing, in what you do. You can always find an instructor or a leader to do the trip, or you can find someone to do your bookkeeping, but you are the most passionate person about your product, and no one can sort of convey that to anyone better than you can.
That is solid advice. Love it. Love it. Question number 2 then, what valuable resource, so it could be a book, YouTube channel, piece of equipment, blog, podcast, or other, can you recommend to help others following a similar path to you?
Apart from this podcast, or obviously the BucketLister podcast, if you want to check that out, that's got some useful tips on it. But I think a useful resource is actually networking with other people who are actually already doing it. I get asked a lot, if people want to do that, how do you get into leading? How do you do that? And, I've taken a number of people away. And what we do is we always say to people that we won't let you lead a trip unless you've already been to that country or you've already been on that trip. And it's one of the things that we're quite strong on in terms of, we don't want to send somebody out if they're not got the experience of Kilimanjaro or they haven't been to South America before, and then people go, well, that's really hard for me then to get into it. How do you do that? And I mean, I've taken so many people away. Like, so we work on a 1:16 ratio, and quite often you end up with, you add a few more onto it and you add a few more onto it because people generally cancel. So you're like, well, if we take 19, we'll probably have 3 people cancel, and then we're back to our 16 again. And then they don't cancel. So you still end up with like 19 going on it. And in that situation, like, I've taken so many people where I've said, well, I can't afford to pay you to go on this trip, but if you want to come out and assist me, like, I'll pay all your expenses and take you out and you can come on this trip for free. And then, but, people have had to get to know me for me to make that offering to them at that point. So I think, people are a huge resource if you're thinking of getting into the industry, and the more you can do for people, and the more you can be about and the more you can sort of engage. I think people in this industry are super, super friendly and they want to help people. But it's obviously then up to the people to put themselves out there to actually give themselves these opportunities at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. Because people are often sort of hesitant or reticent to not do things to get the experience, but it is a bit of a chicken and the egg scenario, but that's sometimes just how it's got to be, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is, and it's not an easy industry to get into. Like, you can't just walk in and say, I want to be a climbing instructor, unless you've done a lot of climbing beforehand and you've gone out and paid for those qualifications yourself. You're not going to straight walk in somewhere and start working. And the number of people we've had who've wanted a career change and, can I come and help you out? And then, they've been really helpful. Then you can give them a bit of paid work helping you. And then you can go, well, we've got a climbing course coming up. Do you want to go on it? And they're like, oh yeah, you have it for free. Like, you're helping us out. And then it just sort of rolls into that then. And then eventually they become useful and then they come on full-time staff. And so I think it is a hard industry to get into, in that, the overseas travel industry is a very hard industry to get into. And a lot of people do start in the school expedition style trips. They might have their mountain leader, they might have something like that, and then they need to get experience, and that is a good way of going and getting experience. You might go and be an assistant leader on a school expedition, but it just gets you into that, just gets you, the experience you need, and gets you into that group of circles of people where you've got more chance of then doing something else afterwards at the end of the day.
Yeah. I've often found, simply doing that, just surrounding yourself with people that do similar things or are in a position that you want to get to, can absolutely work wonders, can't it?
Yeah, I mean, it is. I mean, this and also as well, then, like, when your network grows, when you are short of a member of staff or you need a leader or whatever, you've got people you can reach out to. That's how I've grown my business, is by having a large network of people where you can say, do you fancy doing a trip to, I've got, an extra trip to, or I've got extra people on an island peak trip. I need another leader. Do you fancy doing it? And then they're like, yeah, brilliant. But I think the problem with, this industry is, and you probably know this as well, is it's hard to make it a full-time job unless you've got a full-time job. I mean, we've got a couple of full-time leaders who, we've got enough trips to give them to make them full-time. But then we've also got a lot of other freelance leaders who do ad hoc trips for us, as in through the year. But, they're having to make up their year of other stuff as well, whether that's running their own business or, but a lot of people just want to travel every year, and, they're happy to have one trip a year and use that as their holiday, for example. Like, what trips have you got this year, Keith? I'll go and do one of yours and I'll take that as 2 weeks of my leave, because, I get to go and get paid and go somewhere cool around the world. So
yeah. Great. And finally, what would you like to see change about the adventure industry?
Change about the adventure industry. I suppose it's really difficult with the adventure industry because obviously running a business, like there is an infinite amount of money that we can charge for a product to somebody. And, there's that age-old thing of how much freelance staff should be getting paid. And when you are running a business, and it's very difficult when you look at the margin sometimes of what you can physically charge a school for an activity day or a residential. And then you think, well, actually, like we can't even offer this to you because by the time we've got to bring freelance staff in who want X a day, it just doesn't make it work in terms of that. And I think for sometimes it's really difficult with staff. And we'd love, you'd love to be able to pay outdoor staff more, but the product only carries a certain price tag, and it's like we have the same conversation in North Devon about the climbing wall. We can't charge London prices in North Devon for the climbing wall because no one's ever going to pay to come in climbing. When I've been to London climbing walls and you're paying £16 to go in climbing for a session. If we were to put that in our prices down in Devon, no one's ever going to turn up to pay to come in climbing because they just wouldn't be able to afford to pay it. So I think, there needs to be and I don't really know how you're ever going to do it. And, you get some really good freelance staff who you would quite happily pay the money to. But then also there's a lot of freelance staff out there who you go, well, no, I can't, you don't have the qualifications to even demand the money there. Will it ever be standardized? I would like for it to be standardized. So everybody was kind of, there was an agreed amount for certain things, but then at that point you no longer become a freelance instructor, do you? That's the thing. As a freelance instructor, you should be setting your own rates. That is the whole point of being freelance. You're running your own business at the end of the day. But I think that is the biggest problem at the minute. Is there is a lot of freelance instructors out there, and the number of times that I've seen people come out of an apprenticeship, for example, and then gone and become a freelance instructor. Like they haven't got the experience to be a freelance instructor. They haven't really worked with groups enough to be a freelance instructor, but all of a sudden they're wanting. So, in the industry, it is very hard at the minute to find staff. And I think if freelance rates were standardized, I think it would become a whole lot easier on the industry. I just don't know who's going to do that, how that's going to happen. I don't think it potentially ever will happen. And especially with the economy at the minute, because, we're just seeing, it didn't change for a long time with freelance instructors, but, all of a sudden now it seems to have crept up, because of the cost of living and everything. It's had to creep up. You look at the fuel cost last year. If you're a freelancer driving the length and breadth of the country every week to jobs, like there's no way you could continue to keep working for what was before because
no.
And I think that's the difficult thing is it's very hard to find staff, and it would be great. And I think COVID took so many staff out of the industry. There was no work for them for 2 years. They went and found something else and actually realized, hang on a minute, this is a lot easier than doing this is a lot easier than what I was doing before, and I've got a 12-month salary now. And it just kind of hasn't filled that. We haven't filled that gap up of people again. And chatting to other centre owners, like everyone's having the same problem at the minute, is finding qualified staff. We can find people to train for apprenticeships. They're great. And, I love having apprentices in because you can train them exactly what you want them to do. But I think, I know there was talk the other day of, be great to have a union for freelance instructors and all of that sort of thing. But, who's ever going to take that on? I don't know. But I think if you could standardize rates in terms of qualifications, I think that would be, it would be very much easier for the outdoor industry at that point, I think.
Point well made. Yeah, there's lots of discussion on various Facebook groups. Yeah, it's interesting to follow.
Yeah, I think the thing with it is I always think, like, you've got, as a business owner, you are taking an awful lot of risk all the time. A freelancer turns up, you're paying the VAT, you're paying for the kit, you're paying for the insurance for that group, you're paying all of this. And when you then take out the wages, is there anything left? And the number of times I've priced up, a family of 4 want to go and do a day's climbing. Well, actually, to make any money out of that, that day is got to cost you £350, and no family's ever going to pay £350 for a day's climbing activity. By the time you take the 20% VAT off, you take your insurance off, you take all that off, there's nothing left for the business owner sometimes. You're just running this stuff to pay for other people. And as a business owner, you're better off going, well, we won't do it then, because I don't want the wear and tear on the kit, because I've got to provide all that as well. So it's a really interesting one, and I think there's plenty of discussions going to be coming from it over the next few months, as there always will be, like there always is. But when I read some of those, like you say, those posts on Facebook, it's really difficult sometimes to hold your tongue in and go, well, like, the business owner, if you think it's this easy running a business, then maybe you should try and go and run a business and see how you get on trying to find staff as well. Sometimes I think it's a hard world to be in sometimes.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being so honest and transparent there, Keith. It is an interesting debate. Keith, where can people find out about you, get in contact with you, etc.?
So obviously I'm on LinkedIn as Keith Crockford. And then the Bucket List Company is just thebucketlistcompany.co.uk. We are always looking for new leaders and stuff. So if people do want to get in contact, then I can put their CVs and details onto the person in the operations that deals with all of that. And then the podcast is the BucketLister Podcast on all your favorite podcast providers. But that's where they can find me if they want to get in touch.
Fabulous. Well, thanks ever so much for your time, Keith, and no doubt we'll be in touch in the future. Best of luck with everything, and here's to a good end of season for you.
Perfect. Thanks very much.
Cheers. Thank
Cheers.
you. Bye-bye. If you've enjoyed this podcast and want to hear the next one, please subscribe. Please share the podcast with your friends and followers. You can also find the Adventure Pro Podcast on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook @Adventure Pro Pod.